We have the host of the Mehdi Hasan Show and a frequent host on MSNBC and someone whose interviews strike fear in the hearts of his guests, Mehdi Hasan. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So for the last few years, Republicans have seized on AOC as some radical extremist. She's not. I've spoken about this at length on my podcast. You have on your show. And yet now, on the right, you have an actual radical extremist in someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene. Does having her in Congress present Democrats with an opportunity to be able to brand them as the Marjorie Taylor Greene party of far-right lunacy, the way that they did with the Squad, only now it'll be justified?
Yeah, it's a really good question because you have the Democrats in Congress putting out statements this week saying, we're going to tie the Republicans to QAnon ahead of the midterms. You have Nancy Pelosi sending out a letter saying Kevin McCarthy is QCA instead of RCA.
Yeah.
Very much a deliberate attempt to say this is the party of QAnon. And I'm torn on it myself, because on the one hand, I do think these people shouldn't be given a pass. And I do think Democrats should highlight the extremism, the craziness, the far right nature of their opponents and not normalize them. It's something I've said for many years during the Trump era. On the other hand, when you speak to experts on QAnon, people who have followed this movement as an extremist movement, as an online movement, they make the point that it could very easily backfire because you're mainstreaming this group, amplifying them, giving them a platform, talking about them. And they're desperate for people to talk about them, right? They want mainstream acknowledgement, if not acceptance. And secondly, if you say to, disgruntled people who hate the Democrats, hate liberals, that, you know what, we can't stand QAnon. If you're dealing with people whose entire reason for living is to own the libs, then you're more likely to push them into the arms of QAnon if they see QAnon as the best way to annoy the Democrats and piss them off. And it was that whole argument under Trump. Remember, there was a lot of Republicans who said, well, we're forced into the arms of Trump because you're being mean to us. A ridiculous argument. But to some extent, you can understand the kind of illogic of that position, if I can call it that. So I don't know. I'm torn on how it will play out. I do think they should go after Marjorie Taylor Greene and point out that she's in this party, and not just Greene. There are many around Greene. I worry that we only focus on Greene and forget the Boberts, forget the Cawthorns, forget the Gosars and Biggses, Paul Gosar, Andy Biggs, who have been accused of involvement in the January 6th rally, who've been in Congress for a while and take some odious far-right positions on many issues. So, yeah, it's a very difficult one as to what extent do you cover this problem, highlight this problem without amplifying it?
That's a great point. And I do agree with your point about not just focusing on the worst offender, which is Marjorie Taylor Greene, when there are so many more. But yeah. To ask one more question about her specifically, because this is an issue that's coming up, do you think that she should be expelled? And what would your response be when people say, well, her constituents elected her?
Look, expulsion is a last resort. It's not something that is done lightly. On my show on Peacock earlier this week, we interviewed Jimmy Gomez, congressman from California, who is pushing the expulsion resolution right now, even after the committee vote, passed with the Democrats, but only 11 Republicans supporting. And he made the same point. Look, this is in extremis. No one's saying we just deploy it every day. And the Republican argument being, well, if you do it, we'll do it when we have the majority. Well, you can't make rules based on how bad faith actors are then going to abuse them. There is a rule for expulsion. It's there in extremis. And if this case doesn't merit it, I don't know why we have the rule. This is a member of Congress, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is on record suggesting multiple Democrats, including the Speaker of the House, be killed, either via a bullet to the head, a comment on Facebook that she liked, or via execution for treason, which is a conversation she actually engaged in openly. She was moderator of a forum with lots of nooses. She's talked about Obama and Clinton being rounded up, and who knows what happens to them. So I think if in that situation where you have a member of Congress who threatened the life of the leadership of one party, threatening the lives of other members of that party, yes, there should be an expulsion. That should be unacceptable. There is limits to everything in a free democratic society. Inciting violence is one of them. That's why the president has been impeached and is on trial this week, because there are lines you don't cross. Now, Democrats don't have the votes for it. You need a 2/3 majority in the House to expel Marjorie Taylor Greene. Clearly, Republicans are not going to join that. Only 11 of them wanted to strip her of a committee assignment, which makes no sense because they stripped Steve King of his committee, the Iowa Republicans. Steve King was a horrible far-right coddler of white nationalism, but he's nowhere near as bad as Marjorie Taylor Greene. Yeah. And yet, Steve King should maybe give an apology by the Republicans because they stripped him, but they won't strip Marjorie of a committee. So of course they're not going to get on board with expulsion. But yes, in theory, in principle, of course she merits expulsion.
There's also the argument that it would be setting a bad precedent. But to that, I would say if the precedent is that we expel people who've supported other members of Congress getting executed, so be it. Like, I don't think you'll get any pushback from Democrats, you know?
Yeah, it's the kind of, as I said, it's the bad faith whataboutism of the Republican Party. So you have it on Marjorie Taylor Greene where they're saying, well, watch out. Wait till you see what we do to Ilhan Omar. We'll make the case that Ilhan Omar tried to kill anyone. I dare you. This is ridiculous, but they're not. They just, they traffic in lies and conspiracy and whataboutism. Look at the example of Trump. John Cornyn, senator from Texas. This is not Marjorie Taylor Greene, senior Republican senator from Texas, on the record saying, well, if you impeach a former president of ours, what's to stop us from impeaching a former president of yours? Nothing. If a former president of the Democratic Party incites insurrection, please do impeach him. No argument from me.
Yeah. Well, also, no American would be expected to show up in a work environment where their coworkers are calling for their execution. If you asked any of these Republican lawmakers whose position is that it's okay, whether they'd want their own kids to show up in a job where someone called for them to be killed, I bet they'd suddenly have a change of heart.
I mean, the irony is their counter argument is, what about Maxine Waters? Maxine Waters, who never suggested anyone should be killed, Democratic congressman who said during the family separation crisis, if you see members of the Trump cabinet, confront them, challenge them, form a crowd, push them away. Now, you can say there's a genuine good argument, good faith argument to be had about, was that a dangerous argument? Should you really be suggesting crowds of people? You have a democratic right to object to your elected representative in public place, in a restaurant. Of course you do. Should you be encouraging a crowd to do that? Perhaps not in the current environment, perhaps not in a society like America where so many people are armed. So perhaps Maxine Waters' comments weren't wise. That's a legitimate argument to have. But she wasn't trying to kill anyone, inciting the death of anyone. And yet they cite Maxine Waters as, well, that's one of yours. And the argument being, well, hold on, in good faith, okay, Maxine Waters, if you understand Maxine Waters' argument, could be interpreted dangerously, then why aren't you angry about Marjorie Taylor Greene's comment? It's another reminder that for the Republican Party, it's just pure whataboutism. There is no merit to any of these arguments because, yes, if they really were concerned about Marjorie Taylor, about Maxine Waters' supposed incitement of others, they'd take action against Marjorie Taylor Greene to be consistent.
They'd be just
if they really were
her.
Concerned about what they call anti-Semitism from Ilhan Omar, a tweet about the Benjamin that she already apologized for a long time ago, then they would take action against Marjorie Taylor Greene, who talks about the Rothschilds and Zionist supremacists flooding Europe with brown-skinned immigrants, who talks about a laser beam from the Rothschilds causing the California fires, who says awful things about George Soros wanting to continue the Holocaust. Yeah, you'd take action against such a person.
Yeah. So let's switch gears to Fox. I'm sure you have.
Is that really switching gears, Brian? Feels like we're in the same train.
Well, yeah. So I'm sure you have a great affinity for the network. Lou Dobbs' show was canceled. Dobbs was the highest rated host on Fox Business. And yet Fox has stood by some of their hosts during some of their most depraved episodes. Tucker's out white supremacy, Hannity ruining the life of Seth Rich's family because he thought it would help Trump. We could go on for days. Why do you imagine they pulled Dobbs, and why now?
It's a great question. I don't think any of us know right now the exact answer. Just to pick up on one point you made, the highest rated host on Fox Business, something we can get lost in is that, some of these ratings, we talk about ratings, but actually look at the numbers. Brian Stelter of CNN, their media correspondent, made a very good point on Friday night, which was, Dobbs pulled in 500,000 views, 500,000 viewers, which is double what a lot of other Fox Business hosts pull in, but it's still not the equivalent of a Tucker Carlson who pulls in 10 times that amount on the actual main Fox channel. But Brian's argument, and Brian knows Fox inside out, he's the author of a very good book on Fox News. His argument is that, look, it's not about ratings in the end, because ratings can be only so much of a shield. Ultimately, it's like any other workplace. It's about management. It's about how you get along with your coworkers. And, Tucker Carlson has the ear of the Murdoch family, and Lou Dobbs apparently did not. He definitely had the ear of Donald Trump, who came out with a statement effusively praising him. But, Lou Dobbs, let's just talk about Lou Dobbs for one moment. Lou Dobbs made North Korean state TV look like, challenging investigative journalism. I mean, Lou Dobbs, if you watch some of the clips of Lou Dobbs doing the rounds. Yeah, Lou Dobbs, just some of the stuff he was saying about Trump, I can't even summarize it here for those of you who haven't seen it. Go just pick up some of the clips doing the rounds on Twitter.
I can summarize it. There was a survey that he put forward that he said, how would you rate Trump's performance? Yes. Superb, great, very good. That's how you'd sum it up.
Amazing. On a business channel, what I love about Fox Business is there's no actual business news on it.
Just kind of your regular business news there.
So Lou Dobbs being canned, and this is the thing in the media is obviously I work for a rival network, and those of us in the media don't want to encourage the sacking of our competitors, our rivals. It's not a good look. It's not decent. It doesn't work for any of us. We're all in the media industry, which is under huge competitive pressures, and there's something called free speech. You don't want to silence people you disagree with. The difference is this is Fox canning Lou Dobbs. So I tweeted this on Friday night. It's like, Fox cancelled Lou Dobbs. That's the phrase you use in the media industry. When what do? You don't sack them, you don't fire them, you cancel their show. The irony of ironies, given we live in an age where the right wing is obsessed with cancel culture. There's very few things the modern Republican Party stands for other than owning the libs and cancel culture, fighting cancel culture. And yet, literally, Fox cancelled Lou Dobbs. And they cancelled him, possibly, we don't know, because of this lawsuit that's out from Smartmatic and Dominion, which is suing Fox and has named Dobbs as one of the people who made allegedly defamatory remarks about their voting machines. So the irony of silencing Lou Dobbs, of cancelling him, only a couple of weeks after Rupert Murdoch gave a massive speech attacking cancel culture. Oh, the irony. The script writers of this show just can't make up better storylines, I say.
Yeah, it's just, when will this cancel culture from the right stop? So where do you think conservative media goes from here? Because on one hand, you have the obvious consequences of having a political party predicated solely on disinformation, but on the other hand, their audience clearly has an appetite for it. So do they try and cut the crazy a little bit and regain some ground, or do they just go all in with the conspiratorial lunacy?
It's a great question. And prior to the Lou Dobbs cancellation, I'd have said they'd go all in, but we don't know what Fox is doing right now. And I think we have to wait and see how the dust settles. We know they're trying out new and crazier hosts for their 7 o'clock slot, more extreme, more provocative. But of course, it's not just Fox. That's what's so interesting about the media climate we live in right now. You have Newsmax, you have OANN, Newsmax to the right of Fox, OANN to the right of Newsmax. And these channels are definitely going all in. I mean, look at just what's happened in recent days. You have Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy, the Trump conspiracy theorist, multimillionaire, goes on Newsmax, which he pays for a lot of advertising on, helps fund, goes on the channel. And when he starts talking about Dominion and voting machines, Newsmax, which like Fox is worried about being sued, cuts him off. The host shuts him down. The host gets up and walks off screen. You think, wow, Newsmax taking a stand, maybe because they're worried about being sued. Nope. Next day, host comes back and apologizes to Mike Lindell. Why? Because the viewers lose their minds. And Brian, this is key to understand. This stuff is being driven. You know, it's almost like Frankenstein and his monster. These channels, this right-wing media echo chamber, created an angry, riled up, conspiratorial base. And now when they try and kind of, restrain the base or try and inject a little bit of reality back into that base, they created that crazy atmosphere. Guess what? The base doesn't want it. The base is willing to move. So they moved from Fox to Newsmax, Newsmax to OAN. OANN ran a documentary, I think 12 hours of it, 8 hours of it, a bunch of hours continuous from Mike Lindell, which they added a disclaimer on saying this is paid for TV. It's opinion. These views on Dominion are not our views. They're not facts. Dominion lawyers are telling David Corn and Mother Jones, I just saw on Twitter, that doesn't necessarily protect them from a lawsuit. So on the one hand, you've got these big companies threatening to sue these right-wing channels, which might be the only way to stop the conspiracies. On the other hand, as you say, they're just doubling down into the craziness. And I cannot overstate how dangerous this rhetoric and dialogue from the right has been. You look at most of the problems we have in our society today, the disbelief in the election, the attack on Capitol Hill, it goes back to right-wing provocateurs saying this stuff, propaganda. You look at COVID and the refusal to wear masks, the disbelief in the threat from coronavirus. It goes back again to right-wing media outlets, fanning hysteria, fanning conspiracy. So many of the most deadly problems in our society today, climate change denial, all roads lead back to these far-right media outlets, both online and on cable. And I think that's the conversation Democrats haven't been willing to have for a while. Liberals have kind of turned a blind eye until the Trump era. And it's at the heart of so much, Brian. I know we as journalists, we don't want to talk about it because these are our competitors, our rivals. It feels, but we have to. Democracy is at stake.
So you are very, very good at fact-checking a lot of the bullshit that we see from the right and the left, by the way. But I want to focus on the right for a moment. The left's arguments come typically from a place of when we rebut, it comes from a place of facts and statistics. That's literally all I do on my show. But when the right comes at it, they do so from a place of emotion, and they'll prey on their supporters' fears. So is that emotion approach a better way to be reaching people? Like, are fact checks less potent than what they do?
It's a great question. So my position on this is I've gone through I've gone a roller coaster of emotions and feelings on this debate. I remember after the 2016 election saying to a colleague of mine, we might as well just jack it all in and go be accountants. Not that there's anything wrong with being an accountant, but there's just kind of what we do is pointless. Like there's a huge swathe of the public the huge group of the public who just don't believe. what they're hearing. Facts, there's a lot of empirical evidence out there, Brian, that suggests when you fact check a conspiracy or a lie, it makes the people who believe that conspiracy or lie double down in their support for it. That's depressing.
Entrenches them even further.
That's so depressing for those of us who do fact checking and do factual journalism for a living. And so, this debate's been going on for a while. Drew Weston, the psychologist, wrote a book, The Political Brain, back in, when was it, 2007, 8? No, earlier than that, 2000. I think it was during time flies. It was during the Gore, I remember during the Gore-Bush battle. And he wrote an excellent book about how Democrats, this point you make, which is Democrats focus on facts and figures, cold, hard statistics. That is not how you win over a political brain. That is not how you win over human people. And human beings are won over through storytelling. And some of the great politicians are those who can tell a story, weave a narrative. Now, I think for too long, liberals and leftists have thought, is it storytelling? Is it emotion? Or is it fact? I don't think you have to choose. I think you can tell stories and tell narratives, which are based on fact. What the right have done is they've told great stories about the decline of America, about the evil foreigners, about the evil media, which are great stories. It's a great narrative. Donald Trump weaved a wonderful story, which people bought into. It was based on lies and fear and xenophobia and racism, but it was a great story. There's no debate about that. He was a great storyteller. You only have to watch his rallies and how he kind of entranced his crowds. And authoritarians and fascists and others have always been great at telling horrible stories, but stories that grip people. And I think that, yes, there's no reason that Democrats shouldn't be able to tell stories. And, one of the criticisms of Hillary Clinton in 2016 was that Donald Trump was telling a very easy story about build a wall, ban Muslims, evil foreigner. And Hillary Clinton's response was more often than not, here's how I'm going to pay for my childcare plan. Here are the nuts and bolts. Here's my policy paper, which again, I'm not one of these people who looks down on it. That's important. Right. We should have functioning government and clever people in charge. But that's not enough to win over voters. Sadly, there's so much evidence out there suggesting people don't vote on policy. And the left needs to talk about this a lot because, those of us who were fans of the Bernie Sanders agenda and want to see more and the Elizabeth Warren agenda have to understand that just saying, well, minimum wage polls really well with the American public is not enough. That's not enough to win people over. Just saying Medicare for all is popular, which it is, clearly wasn't enough. We saw that in the Sanders campaign. There has to be a much better story told about all of this.
I had an interview with Al Franken a few weeks ago, and he said that Democrats' slogans usually end by saying "continued on next bumper sticker." So,
well, I remember when I can't remember who it was. One of the Democrats during the last election, was it De Blasio? I think came out with like, "We're going to call him Dirty Don. That's going to be our nickname." It's like, just stop.
Yeah. So let's switch gears to Trump. In Donald Trump, you have a guy who 81 million Americans turned out to vote against. Like, if I was a Republican, that's not someone who I would see as an ace in the hole for 2024. That is a liability. So from a Republican perspective, shouldn't they want to convict him and bar him from running again? Like, doesn't it make sense politically so that they can put someone forward in 2024 who isn't the albatross that Donald Trump is?
Yeah. No, it's in pure self-interest among those Republicans who are considering a 2024 run. Yeah, they should have thrown Donald Trump under the bus. That's on paper, that would make sense. If you're Ted Cruz or Josh Hawley and you want to run for president in 2024, yeah, vote to convict and disqualify him from running. Even if you're not running for president, but you care about the future of your party, you should want him disqualified from office because it cuts him off at the knees. It means he cannot spend the next 4 years saying, will I, won't I run? Here's another rally from me as I dip my toe in the water. I may run. And if he runs, we know he becomes the front runner. And that's what leads you to the other problem. It's almost, it's a connected problem. On the one hand, they should want to stop him from running so that he doesn't suck all the air out of the cycle for the next 4 years, so that they can run themselves without having to worry about him dominating. On the other hand, it's because he's so dominant, it's because he'd be the front runner in 2024 that they're not convicting him, because he is fundamentally popular with the base. There's a poll out last week, I think The Hill, 2 out of 3 Republicans say they would or would consider voting for a third party led by Donald Trump and leaving the Republicans. That's an astonishing statistic when you think about how polarized we are. If you think about how American politics is decided by partisanship, the number one reason why somebody votes is because they identify as a Republican or Democrat, over policy, over everything else. That's what all the studies over the last 20 years have shown. But, partisanship is the key driver of people at the election. And yet suddenly, Republicans are willing to drop their affiliation for Trump, which suggests they're not attached to the party anymore. They're attached to Trump and Trumpism and what he stands for, the grievance culture, the owning the libs, all of that nonsense. So, yeah, Republicans have a real problem. They're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. If they convict him, the base who loves Trump will destroy them. If they don't convict him, he will destroy them.
Yeah, that's a great point. So yet again, they're just driven by their fear of Donald Trump.
But again,
The
who
last 4
created
years,
the Trump problem? Brian, who created
right.
It's like the Fox problem and the Newsmax problem. Who created this base?
Yeah.
Who created the Trump phenomenon? Who opened the door to Trumpism? These Republicans, mainstream Republicans who allowed him in.
Yeah, I mean, the sowing part seemed fun. The reaping part, not so much.
Yes. Well
so
said.
I want to switch gears to your show. I think I can safely say that very few people are able to interview the way that you do. Some of the most viral clips online are of you grilling a guest, and you can see their desperation for the earth to open up and swallow them whole. So knowing how effective you are, is it difficult to book guests who don't share your political leanings?
100%. It's very difficult. In the American media right now, on the one hand, I'm very critical of interviewers who do softball questions. And I've been very openly critical about that. And I think the American media as a whole can do much better when it comes to interviews. And I think that's now a pretty uncontroversial point. Maybe 5 years ago, it was kind of taboo to say that. Now, I think we all get that point at the end of the Trump era. The problem is, I get, on the one hand, I want people to be tougher. On the other hand, I totally understand the pressure. When people on Twitter say, "Oh, it's just all access journalism," well, it's not just access. It's not access journalism. Is not something you can just dismiss. That is a reality. You have to be able to book these guests, and if they don't want to come on because they're scared of you, that's a problem. Now, some people enjoy a good, the cut and thrust of debate and discussion. The problem is, what the real problem is, Brian? It's now we live in an age where 20, 30, 40 years ago. There were like 3-4 Sunday morning shows, a couple of network channels, maybe CNN. If you were a politician trying to make a name for yourself, you had to do, you wanted to go on the big shows. Today, especially on the right, where most of the lies and misinformation is coming from, you have a safe space, to use a phrase they don't like. Yeah. They've cocooned themselves off in a safe space of far-right media who offer them softball Lou Dobbs polling questions where they never have to worry about ever being challenged or held to account by Sean Hannity. And therefore, it's very hard for those of us who want to book a Republican to come on and make a case for a non-crazy case for the Republican Party because they don't have to. There's no pressure now. Right. They can retreat into Breitbart or Fox or Newsmax or OAN or whatever the rest of the entire. And that is a real problem. And that's something we have to think about. On the other hand, there's also a debate about, do we want some of these people on air, Brian? Because I've now reached a position where, there was a time when I would interview in my old Al Jazeera show, I interviewed a lot of prominent Trump supporters, including General Michael Flynn and others. And there's a point you get to now where, do you want to give a platform to people who are inciting violence or lying about the election? And I think that is a really important question that we as a media also have to kind of struggle with. It's A, can you get these people to come on? B, when they come on, can you ask them tough questions? And C, do we want them on at all if they're only going to gaslight the audience? What value is there in that? So it's a really difficult position we're in right now, because I don't think we've been in a position like this in modern American history where, politicians have always lied. But this level where people are coming on and saying up is down, black is white, hot is cold, Donald Trump has won the election. What do you do in that scenario? And to go back to our earlier point, fact checking isn't enough. Just shouting out facts in a back and forth doesn't help, because we saw that recently where Rand Paul went on a Sunday morning show and the interviewer tried half-heartedly to fact check them. And then he went on Twitter and said, "Here I am owning the media." And his base loved it. Yeah. And you have to ask yourself, do you want to be complicit in that? I don't know. Yeah. It's a tricky one, because we don't want to silence, no matter how much we disagree on one part of the political spectrum, but we also want to value truth and facts.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Well, I think that's a great spot to end. So again, you can check out Mehdi on the Mehdi Hasan Show on Peacock. That's weekdays from 7 to 8 p.m. It is free to stream at peacocktv.com. Mehdi, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Brian.